Thank you for all your contributions to Module 1. Here are my additional notes. The graphic shows a summary of our Mentimeter poll, where more of you say that in your experience, organizations begin with the context. Most organizations I've observed actually begin with the end in mind, like vision, objective, and goal. This table summarizes VUCA, the standard terms on the left, with what has been called VUCA prime, which are the countervailing forces, also following the VUCA acronym: vision, understanding, clarity, adaptability, and agility. One of the foundations of Module 1 is the difference between leader-centric and follower-centric. Much of leadership discussion, both contemporary and formal, are about leaders. It follows the leader-centric model. But as you've experienced, many of the more recent studies and research efforts have been about the follower-centric model, and perhaps you might find that to be a more practical inquiry into leadership. So, just a simple example. I have a friend. She's worked in the Philippines, of course, she's Filipina, and she's worked in Hong Kong. The feedback to her in the Philippines has often been, "You're too aggressive." When she moved to Hong Kong and worked there, the feedback to her was, "You're too passive." So now she's confused. But of course, following the model on the previous page, the follower-centric model, now we can see why. She's the same leader, but her context has changed. These next two slides summarize on the left conventional flow, on the right contemporary flow. When you download this particular deck to read it, you can see the difference. So I won't read it in detail. And this is the second such slide. So to think about changes in your environments, we've covered two methods for tracking changes. The first was STEP, which, as we know, has several versions. And you practice that within the LMS through the quiz, through the Rise of BPO's case study. The second one, on the previous two slides, differentiates conventional versus contemporary. That could be also a useful way to track changes. Try to break down the elements in your environments that you could differentiate this way. What has changed in your practice? What has changed in your discipline? What has changed in the environment of your work or of your studies? So just a simple differentiation of this is how things were conventionally, and these are how things will be if we label them as contemporary. In our case study of the follower-centric discussion, our focus was the current president of the US. And within the same page in Canvas, I've shared excerpts from a book about the rise of populism. And it is an example of material from which to derive research questions. So what I'd like you to practice more about are how to frame research questions. So read that excerpt, that one-page excerpt within this Canvas page. It's called The Rise of Populism. It's a PDF file. And then you can extract from there examples of perhaps more substantial research questions regarding the follower-centric model. And then just to summarize, for those of you in OD and Business Leadership Studies, these concentric circles are what I intend to look like concentric circles. Leaders in the middle, the organization, the external stakeholders, and the macro environment. And the way to think about context is how do all of these contexts appear now and how are they changing, because they're constantly changing. And how they constantly change exert a force on each of the other circles. And of course, for the leader, the goal is to be on top of all of these changes, in fact, to be ahead of all of these changes. Okay. Now, for those of you in psychology practice, what are the forces that are prevailing upon the individual? Okay. Immediately around that individual is the family, then the neighborhood, which includes both a physical neighborhood, the church, and all of the institutions in the neighborhood, including the larger community, and of course, the Philippines itself and the world. So, we're not just studying the individual, we're studying also how are all of the individual's contexts changing. These were the 4 assignments, 4 articles up for assignment, of which you've tackled 2 of them. But let me summarize all 4 of them. Curtelli, in the article Scanning the Business Environment, Some Conceptual Issues, says much of environmental scanning is derived from systems theory. But her main point is that systems theory disregards communication. So, in order to prove her hypothesis, she brings in concepts from general systems theory, entropy, and communications theory, with this particular point that she wants to prove in italics, that the level of complexity of the environment imposes on the organization a scanning process, and in turn, a communication system. So you cannot separate the scanning process from the communication system. 2 of the articles attack Weber's model, or expand, I should say, Weber's model. The first is Voros, which one group tackled. Okay? This is the usual 4-quadrant model that we see in a lot of studies. And as you can see on this particular model, I've superimposed on the bottom right the STEP framework. So just to show that the usual ES frameworks, ES stands for environmental scanning, only cover really the bottom right quadrant. And on the top left quadrant, I've superimposed a multicolored item, which indicates where Voros spends much of his study on the individual and the interior dimensions. Slaughter, 1999, also seeks to expand the Deshpande et al. Model to bring environmental scanning, quote-unquote, beyond empiricism. Empiricism, of course, of which STEP, STEP, as an example. And here, Slaughter brings in new disciplines related to future studies. These 4 bullet points that are arrayed here, and if you want to learn further about them, these are the search strings, of course, that you can use. Just a note at the bottom, this goes into the very fascinating for me, social construction theories. And you'll study those in qualitative research, both your basic qualitative research and especially in your advanced qualitative research once you get to them. One of the more mind-altering books I've read within PhD leads is Leadership in the New Science. And the bullet point just forms a concise insight that the book brings. Data, in fact, is not objective. Data has a subjective component. And this will not be controversial anymore once you've gone through Wilber, once you've gone through the other expansions of that model. On this slide, I also included a graphic of the famous thought experiment in quantum physics called Schrödinger's cat. Without going into much detail, it just says that the object that you are observing, the nature of the object that you're observing, is changed by the nature of the observer. Again, emphasizing the interior dimensions of context reading and environmental scanning. The other group did Saxby, of course, of which this, I didn't intend to reproduce the whole model in readable form in this graphic. I just wanted to present it as like an avatar. So, of course, Saxby et al. Expanded the Deshpande model because it fails to take into account the environmental scanning mechanisms used by the organizations in each quadrant. So they made 2 enhancements. They added culture and strategy. In fact, explaining also how culture and strategy are intertwined, and the added scanning mechanisms. And finally, I leave you with some concepts you can pick up from session 1 readings. There are 15 that I have listed here. Again, these are search things for you in case you wanted to inquire further into them. And that's our summary for Module 1. Thanks.